Which one of y'all wants to close or say a prayer for me this morning? Which Knox? All right, Knox.
All right. Hello, family. Oh, that sounds like you guys lost an hour of sleep last night. Let's try it again. Hello, family. There we go. Hey, good morning. I'm sure you guys are tired, but thank you for being here. Are you guys off of school this week? Yeah, that's awesome. Are any of y'all sticking around? Anybody leaving? Going somewhere? Raise your hand if you're going somewhere. Where? Raise your hand if you feel like telling the group where you're going. Is anybody going somewhere fun? Knox, where are you going? Why? You got family? National parks. Cool. Well, I hope y'all have a great spring break. I'm glad you guys are here this morning. We've got some announcements, and then we will go from there. So let's do it. Okay, as usual, we're reading something for the Word Association, and this month we are reading Deuteronomy. What a cool, Moses churro. Yeah, Moses churro. Okay, keep up with that. That's awesome. Staycation is happening this next week since you guys are off school. On Monday, we're going to play Ultimate Frisbee. We're going to go to the park. We're going to bring our lunches and just kind of hang out and do the park thing. And then on Thursday, we're going to eat some lunch and then come to the building and play hide and go seek. So if you guys are looking for something to do this week while you're off of school, on Monday and Thursday, this is crucial. If you have not sent in a question, this Wednesday, we're going to do something called You Asked For It. And we've got several questions in, but if you want to get your question answered this Wednesday, try to get that in, scan the QR code, fill out the Google form, and we'll try to answer your question. Next slide. All right, also, you guys are off of school, so you've got if you're in town, you've got no excuse. But if you're in high school, MPIG is happening. Joe Brown's going to speak, so that's going to be a lot of fun from 6 to 8 on Monday. Look forward to that, and that's exciting news. All right, I think, okay, this is the last slide, I think, but we've got a T-shirt contest. We've got several of you guys have sent in designs and ideas and things like that, and they've all
We're all probably a little bit tired with daylight savings time starting, but I'm excited about it because I like getting home and still being light. So I'm pumped about that. I missed Tyler's intro, so if we already did this, we can skip it. But we've done good news. Have we shared any good news? What's some good news going on? I know we got some spring break good news. Anybody got anything they're super excited about?
Not doing school for this week.
That sounds pretty awesome. Very cool. Philip?
Can I crowdsource for a minute?
Yeah.
We're going to Miami, but we've never been. Has anybody ever been to Miami, and what should we know about this place? Who's been to Miami? Anybody?
Are y'all like staying as like a beach trip?
Yeah. Do y'all, like, what should we know? What do we need to know about Miami? What do we need to do? Where we need to eat? Any pointers at all?
You should talk to my dad, Philip.
I'll talk to your dad. Yeah, he's the traveler. Yeah. All right, that's what I'll do. Never mind. Thank you for your time. It's great.
Well, what else? Anybody else got any good news? Yeah, what we got?
saw Philip at Picture Road in Lebanon last night.
Now you gotta go to Picture Road for Lebanon, right?
Yeah.
Hollywood, Lebanon.
We miss it, man, so much.
Oh yeah, I was really glad I heard that. Especially like, I like every kind of pizza, but I also like the pizza's different. So that's what I like about Picture Road. Picture Road, you can't get it really anywhere else. So. All right, well this morning we're going to be talking about covenants. So we're about to start reading and studying, specifically in Mr. Tim's class, about the book of Deuteronomy. And we'll get around to kind of how that ties in a little bit more. But it probably doesn't go or does go, however the saying goes, without saying that covenants are a really important thing in the Bible. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, hopefully get a better understanding of what a covenant is, and maybe why they're important, and even more specifically, why it's something that you should be concerned about. So we're going to be talking about covenants. I'll just have y'all, is our clicker working? Okay, yeah. So here's a question just to start off our conversation this morning with. When we were little, we insisted on making our parents promise to us, maybe even pinky promise. I was thinking about this as Philip had talked about the idea of studying covenants before studying Deuteronomy. And I was thinking about covenants, which is basically kind of more of an older way of saying a promise, right? And so I was thinking about this idea of a promise, and then like promise, pinky promise, my brain just started going down that route. And I've got 3 kids. I've got now a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 7-year-old. And they always want a promise, right? And we say, hey, we'll go get donuts another time. You promise? Hey, we'll go get toys another time. You pinky promise, right? I don't remember the last time in a serious manner that I was talking to my mom and said, Mom, do you promise you're going to bring presents at Christmas? Mom, do you promise you're going to make your famous pancakes when I come home? Like, I don't ask my parents for a promise anymore. I certainly, unless I'm just being silly, I certainly don't ask people to give me a pinky promise, right? And probably as you get older, you maybe have never thought about that. Honestly, I don't know that I'd ever thought about that. But as we get older, requiring someone to make a pinky promise, or even just requiring them to say, I promise, is usually not as big a deal. It was really important that we clarified that when we were little, but as we get older, that doesn't become as important. Why do you think that is? Why do you think you were so obsessed with the pinky promise when you were little, but now it's more just like a joke or something silly? Anybody got any ideas? And there's not necessarily, I kind of arrived at a thought, but it's not necessarily a right or wrong question. So why do you think it was important to get promises when we were little? But maybe at your age now, you don't really think about that anymore.
So you know you can get what you want.
Say that again?
So you know you can get what you want.
Okay, yeah. So when we were little, we wanted to know we were going to get what we wanted. Yeah, absolutely. That's at the core of it. What else?
By this point, I like to go like a lot of trust.
Okay. you got a lot more trust, right? So you probably didn't have, like, I don't have to promise because my word is my promise, right? Maybe you've heard someone say something like that. If I say it, it's true, right? So yeah, absolutely. We've built up more trust in our relationship, so we don't require that specific language to be included. Anybody else got any ideas or thoughts? How many of you are driving now? Okay, so pretty good. This is most of our class. Oh wait, all of ours, right? So many of you, most of you are driving, and even if you're not driving, you probably have friends that are driving. And just as you get older, you get a lot more autonomous, right? Or you got a lot more freedom. Maybe your parents are willing to let you make a little bit more decisions about when you get donuts, right? At my kids' age, we really try, we're not perfect, but we really try to limit our kids' sugar intake. And so I get donuts now as an adult more than I allow my kids to get donuts because I can handle sugar a little bit better than them, right? So as you get older, you have a little bit more autonomy. You have a little bit more control. When you're 3, how much control did you have? You had none, right? You had almost, you certainly had no control of what your parents were going to do. You certainly had no control of what your parents were going to provide. You certainly had no control that was going to allow you to dictate what the outcome of a situation was going to be. So, you weren't in control of anything. You're not even, I don't know, some of you have, I know some, especially girls, but even some of you guys have probably babysitted little bitty kids. They don't even have control over their own body, right? They're codependent on someone. They can't even, when they're sad, they rely on someone else to make them happy. They're completely, when you're little, and even to an extent at your age, you're still somewhat codependent on other people. As you mature, you'll become more independent. So I'm thinking about all this as I'm thinking about covenants, and I'm thinking about promises. And I kind of arrived at this, and I never really thought about it. I'm sure other smarter people have. But promises are so important when we're really little because we have no power. We have no control. So we rely on someone bigger than us to bring comfort and to bring assurance. You promise there's no boogeyman, monsters in my closet. You promise there's not a ghost underneath my bed. You promise you're going to pick me up from school today. Because a little kid has no idea how to accomplish those things. Has no idea how to bring those things about of their own will. So promises are really, really important for a little kid when it comes to donuts, or being picked up from school, or making sure that their room is safe. So now I was thinking about this, and then of course, you're probably catching where I'm going with this. When it comes to the way that the world is going to unfold, how much control do you have? Very little, right? Yeah, we can make good decisions. We can put our places in position so that we succeed, and we can try to walk the straight and narrow path so that we don't go this way or that way. But ultimately, a lot of things in life are outside of our control. And especially when things are outside of our control, in matters of faith, we have to rely on someone bigger to bring us comfort, to bring us assurance, right? And that's why covenants are so important. Because when it comes to matters of faith and the supernatural and these things that are far beyond what Jody is capable of doing or controlling, if I want to have any comfort, if I want to have any assurance, I have to have a covenant or a promise from someone bigger. When we think about the book of Deuteronomy, that's essentially what it's about. It's Moses reminding them of the promises that God has already kept, but also the promises that God has still kept, but hasn't brought necessarily to fruition yet. So as we think about covenants, they're really important. Maybe you don't think about them on your day-to-day life, but they're really important, especially when it comes to our faith. When you think about a covenant, and I'll ask this first. Let's answer this question. When you think about biblical promises or covenants, what comes to mind? Again, not necessarily, I guess there could be one answer, but I'm not looking for any particular covenant or promise.
I was going to say,
Okay, and what was that? Do you remember?
Lopez,
Yeah, make him a great nation, right? More plentiful than the sand and the stars. Absolutely. That's a great one. What else? Any other covenants you remember from the Bible? Okay, the rainbow. What about the rainbow? Yeah, after the flood subsided, he promised Noah and his descendants that, hey, I'll never do this again. I'm making a promise, a covenant to you.
The covenant with the divide other animals.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Getting a little bit more nuance and maybe not as common, but yeah, God made a lot of promises and covenants. I love that. What else? Any others come to mind? Well, let's think about this. In our normal life as U.S. American Tennessee citizens, what are some covenants that we have in our lives today? Obviously, we still have some of the covenants that, as people of faith, but what about just in general? Are there covenants are not just things that are only Bible things. There are covenants that we still uphold today, specifically like kind of government type of stuff. Anybody got anything that comes to mind?
Marriage.
Marriage, yeah, absolutely. Of course, that is a covenant between man and woman and God, but also it's a covenant. You go and get a marriage license, and you can make that commitment or promise to the state, the state, I guess, whoever licensed that marriage. And so, yeah, we still have the marriage covenant today. What else?
like our Bill of Rights, we have promise and like certain things.
Yeah, absolutely. Our government has made a covenant or promise or guarantee that, hey, everybody has the right to these rights, right? Yeah, absolutely. What else? Any others come to mind? We got any sports fans in here? Any covenants that maybe are a pretty big deal in the sports world? And a lot of jobs and things like that. Contracts, right? If I don't know, what's the latest like NFL quarterback contract? Is there anything in this offseason? Anyways, but if you're an NFL quarterback or professional athlete or even certain jobs will have a contract. Hey, if you fulfill your duties and you stay here 5 years and you come to practice or you come to work and you meet these milestones, we will make a covenant, a promise. We have a contract with you that says if you open up your end of the bargain, we'll open up our end of the bargain. And so covenants and contracts and promises and guarantees and assurances, again, they're not just something that's a Deuteronomy thing. These are something that affect our everyday life. And we expect people to keep these promises and guarantees and assurances and contracts, right? So as we think about a few more biblical examples, Genesis chapter 9, I think y'all actually hit all these. Genesis 9, 11 through 13, one of the most famous promises or contracts or covenants in the Bible. God says this, I will establish my covenant with you, and all flesh shall never again be eliminated by the waters of a flood, nor shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. God said, this is the sign of the covenant which I am making between me and you and every living creature that is with you. For all future generations I have set my rainbow in the cloud, and it shall serve as a sign of a covenant between me and the earth. So after the flood subsided, God said, I'm going to make a promise. I'm going to keep my promises. I'm going to keep my covenant between the whole earth and myself. Another covenant is the one about Abraham. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your offspring after you throughout their generation for an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring after you. This is a really good example of kind of just the framework of a covenant. First of all, specifically, sorry, I keep walking all over you. I can't see my little screen on my phone, so I got to hit this one. But first of all, God initiates it. This is, and this is specifically in regards to Abraham's, God's covenant with Abraham, but that covenant also extends to the generations that come after him. But God initiates it. And another thing about God's covenant with his people, as opposed to maybe some of the contracts and covenants that we have today, is it's very relational. It's not just a command. It's not just a legal document that you're enforced into. It's relational. It's two-sided. Both come to an agreement that this is what's going to happen. And this one extends across generations. And a key point of God's covenants is that they go on and on. Another covenant example we see in the Bible is Genesis 12, 1 through 3. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abraham, Go from your country and from your relatives and from your father's house to the land which I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great. And it shall be a blessing, and I will bless those who bless you, and the one who curses you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed." Again, another covenant from God to Abraham. Now, as we think about covenants specifically today, before we start talking about and studying the book of Deuteronomy, I did want to make this connection to kind of, I guess, preface what we're about to study. So the book of Deuteronomy, by the way, who wrote the book of Deuteronomy? Moses did, right? Or at least, he may have some scribes and stuff. But yeah, Moses is the one that wrote the book of Deuteronomy. And Deuteronomy takes place right before they're about to enter this land that God has made for them, promised for them. So Deuteronomy takes place as the Israelites are about to enter the promised land. And Moses uses this time to remind them of all that God has done for them and to renew the covenant God made with his people. Why do you think that before they enter this promised land, Moses says, all right, time out. It's time to reiterate this. How many chapters? How many? 34. Why do you think Moses is like, time out, time for me to preach to you and remind you of all the promises, covenants, and all the things that we've been through, all the things that God has required of us, all the things that God has done for us before we go into this new land? I think God is, Moses is taking this time now to remind them of the covenants. It's really looking back at what's happening and looking forward too. Why do you think it's so important for them to do this now?
Man, it took them a long time to get there.
Yeah.
They had to learn the lessons the hard way.
Yeah. How long did it take them to get there? 40 years in the wilderness, but if we remember, this promise goes back even before this. I think it was 400 years, right, that they were in slavery. And so it even goes back before that. But yeah, this specific promise, they wandered through the wilderness for 40 years. So yeah, Moses is looking back over a long, difficult period of time and reminding them that even through these difficulties, even though it has taken a long time, longer than probably all of them wished for, God was still faithful. And God's covenant, even though the timeline may have not been preferable to them, God keeps his promises. God keeps the covenant that he has made with his people. An important thing to remember about a covenant is this, is that there's blessings. What are some of the blessings that we get and that we learn about when people uphold their end of the bargain with God's covenants? Think about Abraham. What was the deal? What was the contract? God was going to do what? Make him a great nation, right? But Abraham had to do something. What did he have to do? He had to go, right? He had to be faithful. We always talk about Abraham being the father of our faith in many ways because he's kind of the beginning, but also he was faithful. He did things and he acted out of faith. And so if Abraham wouldn't have went and gone and did what God had called him to do, he wouldn't have received those blessings, right? Another story kind of in the arc of Abraham is God said at one point that he was going to destroy a city, right? Y'all remember this story? What was this story? Someone tell it for us if you know what it is. God said he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he said, but don't do what? Don't look back, right? Don't look back. That was the deal. That was the promise. That was the covenant. You kept the covenant, you kept these promises, you escape, you have freedom, you're safe. You're guaranteed that. You break the covenant, you turn into salt, right? And so, a beautiful thing, a wonderful thing that God promises us and that we have because of this covenants is that if we keep our end of the bargain, we know God's going to keep his end of the bargain, there's going to be blessings. But there's also consequences as well. There's blessings and consequences. What are some other consequences of breaking God's covenant that you can think of that we've learned as we've studied the Bibles in our lives, whether it be from the Old Testament or New Testament? The really popular story in the book of Judges about a really strong man. Don't remember this one? Yeah, tell us about it.
He cut his hair and he lost his foot. That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. As long as he kept the vow that he made, he'd be the strongest man on earth. But he broke that vow. His hair was cut, and there were consequences, right? The blessings were what we, remember Samson, but also there was consequences as well. What else? What are some other consequences of breaking God's covenants that we think about in the Bible? Remember there's a story about a guy that touched something that he wasn't supposed to touch. I remember that. Yeah, and what was the consequence? Yeah, God said don't do it. That was a covenant, that was a promise, that was a guarantee. And so, if we start talking and going down this route, we can almost, and I'm not saying that don't take this, but we can almost look at God as a villain. Oh, he took away Samson's strength. He killed that guy. He took away this nation. He took away this kingdom. He took away their home. But there was covenant, right? And if God makes a covenant, and then he doesn't uphold his end, and we don't uphold our end, there has to be consequences for that, right? So what can we learn about who God is from these stories that maybe don't make us feel warm and fuzzy? Yeah, absolutely. God is just, and with justice comes consequences. And so covenants are a beautiful thing. And pinky promises are a wonderful thing when they're kept, but when they're not, they're hurt. If I pinky promise to my little boy Anderson that we're going to go get donuts after school today, and I break that promise, he's going to be really sad. Now, at 4 years old, not going to get donuts is about the worst thing that could happen, right? Maybe at 14 years old, you're like, that's too much to cry a little bit. Hurts my heart just a little bit. There has to be consequences. And so when someone breaks a covenant, there's hurt. Because remember at the beginning, what is kind of the purpose, or at least what is the feeling associated, especially when we're little, and also when we're thinking about the covenant between our Heavenly Father, what are covenants supposed to provide for us? Assurance, comfort. And we build up trust, right? But if those are broken, there's hurt. Sometimes that hurt means you get chipped out of your home that God has provided. Sometimes that hurt means that if we keep God's commandments, we're going to get God's blessings. But if we break God's commandments, we're going to get the consequences of those, the punishments of those. Well, let's think about this actually a little bit more. Okay, so we talked about consequences, but what are some blessings? Let's think about some good things. I want to feel warm and fuzzy. What are some blessings that you can think about that God's people or individuals in the Bible or the New Testament you by keeping God's covenants?
Prosperity and wealth.
Okay, yeah, we see, especially in the Old Testament, hey, if you do this, you're going to prosper, right? Absolutely. What else? Any other things come to mind? What about today? What are some of the covenants that God has made with us, 21st century, the new covenant? What are some promises or covenants that God has made us? Okay, eternity. That's pretty warm and fuzzy, right? At least eternity with Him. For sure. So, did you raise your hand?
Yeah, it's.
Okay.
Forgiveness of sins.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll confess.
But yeah, I was gonna say, but there's contract. There's two sides to the whole, right? Confess our sins, but we also have to forgive others, right? So there's the fine print, so to speak. So covenants are not just something, and promises of God are not just something that have been long forgotten in the Old Testament. In fact, we are under the new covenant, right? And Jesus died to bring that to be. So let's just think about this a little bit further. A few discussion questions. Why do you think God uses covenants instead of just saying, this is how it's going to be? Because the covenant is two-sided, right? And God can, or at least He has the ability to say, nope, this is how it's going to be. But He enters into covenants.
I think it really shows that He wants a relationship with us.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of goes back, when we think about the framework of God's covenant with Abraham, right? It's going to be between me and you, and your family. It's going to be relational, absolutely. Why else? Any other thoughts around that? Why God doesn't just say, hey, this is how it's going to be, and there's no contract, it's just how it's going to be.
He lets us choose by giving us our free will.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Kind of get really, you can go really deep into that idea. But yeah, free will. God does not enforce us to do anything. He gives us free will, which I think is an extension of His love for us, right? Because if I force someone to do something, even if I'm forcing them to do something maybe that they like or that's good for them, that's not love, right? But God's free will towards us is an extension of His love. Someone else? Do you have anything? Okay. Any other thoughts why God would do this way instead of just saying, hey, my way or the highway? Let's move on to question number 2. Why is it hard? And we can take this kind of superficially, just in our everyday life, donuts and things like that. And I also like to think about it from a spiritual standpoint, faith standpoint. Why is it hard for us to keep promises? Okay. Yeah, we will do what we want to do. Don't always care about what other people want.
Often that's what we want to do.
Okay. That's a really interesting thought because, yeah, I'm glad you said that. I'll go back to my 4-year-old. We actually had a pretty big meltdown this morning. He got a present yesterday, and it was a crane, and it had lights, and it had noises. He wanted to bring it to church today. Well, obviously, we could not allow that to happen. And so, like, we made a bargain with him, right? Well, if you can find something that fits in your backpack, like you can bring that, but it can't have lights, it can't have noises, stuff. And he said, okay. But then when it actually got time to leave, guess what? It wasn't okay anymore. He wanted to go back to bringing his crane. But so he went from, I want to bring my crane. We made a deal with him, and he's like, okay, I'll just put something in my backpack, a steady, a bigger. But then he changed his mind again, and he wanted his crane again. What in the world is going on with this 4-year-old? Can you believe that he would change his mind in a matter of 30 minutes from wanting to do this, and then on his own free will, for the most part, with some coaxing by us, he was like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll agree to that deal. And then he just totally turned the contract up on me and said, no deal, I'm doing it this way or not. Can you imagine a 4-year-old doing that? Of course you can. Because a 4-year-old's attitude and a 4-year-old's ability to regulate and a 4-year-old's decision making is not fully developed. It's certainly not capable of reasoning in the same way that I am, right? When I think about that idea in relation to our Heavenly Father, what comes to your mind? Kind of switch that between us and God. You're older than a 4-year-old. You can make good decisions most of the time. You can reason and understand why some things may need to be this way or that way. But you're still just 14, right? You're still just 17. And right now, maybe you're not hungry. But what about in an hour from now? Anybody act a little bit different when they're hungry? Right? That's what the whole Snickers commercial is all about, right? Maybe you haven't had your morning coffee yet, and you're a really bad person. And you get your morning coffee, and like, oh wow, what a sweet, sweet young lady. Or maybe you've had a really great day and you aced all your tests. You're like, yeah, I'll clean my room tonight. Yeah, I'll pick you up from the airport this weekend. But maybe you've had a really bad day and you flunked all your tests. And you're still hungry because the lunch at school was terrible. And now you're like, no, I'm not going to clean my room. No, I'm not going to do something on the weekend. God is everlasting. He is unchanging. My mood changes from minute to minute. Sometimes even quicker than that. And so it's hard to keep our promises because we're human. And because we are not eternal. We've come into a contract with someone who's perfect. And we are not. And so there's going to be lapses in our judgment. There's going to be lapses in our decision. And then if we start talking about sin, right? We have the lust of the flesh, the lust of our eyes, right? The pride of life, all of those things. In 1 minute, maybe our lust and our pride and all those things are in a state of, I'm satisfied, I'm okay, I'm capable of handling this right now. I'm not going to rise to anger in this moment because I'm okay. I'm with safe people. I'm in a safe environment. I feel good. So I'm going to say no to this. I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to say something I shouldn't say. But sometimes we're not with our safe people. We're not in our safe place. And we're hungry, right? Or maybe that temptation has been drawn away at us. Finally, we're just not strong enough to continue to make those good decisions. So promises are broken, right? Absolutely. So what else? Anything else come to mind when you think about why it's hard for people to keep promises? I remember when I was little, actually I still would like a dirt bike, so I guess that hasn't changed too much, but I used to pray for a dirt bike. My mom was like, no. But as I got older, like, I didn't necessarily desire a dirt bike as much. And so I changed, right? So the things that I really, really wanted back then are not necessarily the things that I want right now. And even thinking about our contract with God and our covenant with God and the things that He promised us and that we guaranteed to God, we change, right? So our desires change, our wants change. And so keeping a promise is not something that's easy. I don't want it to sound like, well, just keep the covenant. You're going to get blessings, right? Well, it's a lot more nuanced than that. All right, lastly, what does a promise from God, or how does a promise from God make you feel? I wonder how many of you have never really thought about this. And honestly, I don't necessarily know that I think about this a whole lot. And I think this could be maybe a trap that Satan has set for us. Because when we're younger, we have no control, right? And so when we were younger, we're used to relying on someone else. We're used to someone else making sure we're safe, making sure we're fed, making sure we're protected, making sure we get the things that we want and need. As we get older, you start to take care of yourself a little bit more. And so you start to rely on yourself a little bit more. So maybe promises don't make you feel like they used to. Maybe you don't require a pinky promise the same way you did when you were 5, 6, or 7. And maybe some of that's good. We need to grow up, right? We need to learn to take care of ourselves. But I also wonder Satan's really happy, especially with us who are so blessed in the United States, God's promises don't make us feel as warm and fuzzy. Anybody feel like maybe that could be a trap that they could fall into? I think that's somewhat natural, but I also think maybe the key to that is remembering the depths of God's promises and remembering the depths of God's blessings. Because God's blessings for you are so much greater than getting a good job. So much greater. God's blessings and promises to you are so much better than getting a really good looking boyfriend or girlfriend. God's blessings for you are so much better than getting straight A's and going to college, getting a good job. It's so much better than being a great athlete. It's so much